We're about to start the healthcare session. I'd like to invite Professor Debjani Paul and Professor Santosh Narona to conduct this session. Professor Debjani Paul is from the Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering and has an interest in biological physics and microfluidic devices for healthcare applications. She's working on the development of the mobile microscope for point-of-care diagnostics and education use in the healthcare domain of Tata Center. Professor Santosh Narona from the Department of Chemical Engineering is working on solutions for cervical cancer screening and telepathology framework with Tata Center. He also conducts courses for the Tata Fellows teaching fundamentals of need finding, technology and design development, and deployment of solutions as per Tata Center's mandate. You're very welcome.
Welcome everybody to the session on healthcare solutions. I'd like to invite all the speakers for this session on the stage to be here. So I'd like to first invite Professor Santosh Narona, who's going to handle this session together with me, Professor Jayesh Bellare, Professor Narendra Shah, Professor Soumya Mukherjee, Lin Zhao, and Professor Richard Fletcher. So this is a session of lightning presentations, which means that each of the speakers get exactly 3 minutes to give a pitch on their proposed solution, the problem they're addressing and the proposed solution, and we take all the question answer at the end. So no individual questions right after the talk so that we keep to time. And finally, so there'll be a couple of questions addressed to all the panel members at first from our side, and then we'll hoping to make it into an interactive session where it's more of a dialogue than somebody just talking. And I'd really request people to come forward so that, the conversations become easier. So the first speaker is Professor Santosh Narona. Professor Santosh Narona is a faculty member in the Department of Chemical Engineering, IIT Bombay. He is the PI associated with the Tata Center project, Cervical Cancer Screening. Thanks, Santosh.
So, thank you all. So this is a product which we have already titled Gynecam, and it addresses this problem of cervical cancer which afflicts a large number of women in the country. It's a second leading cause of cancer in women, both in terms of incidence and mortality, with the death rates of over 70,000 a year, and we account, unfortunately, for a very large number of cases worldwide. This is a disease caused by viral infection, and if that viral infection is detected early on, it's easily treated as a condition. And of course, because we have no systematic way of going about screening our entire population, what happens in practice is that this escalates as a disease condition. And at later stages, what happens is invariably for entire families, especially from rural locations, to be uprooted to seek for care at a tertiary facility in an urban area. This, of course, has major implications in terms of, for example, pushing people below the poverty line as they invest now whatever earnings or savings they have in aiming for care. There is, of course, the flip side of this, which is that there's a huge burden placed on tertiary care facilities to now cope with what is a full-blown disease condition. And it's that observation which we realized implied that there needed to be a flipping of how this service was being provided from something at a tertiary care facility to something which could be dealt with at essentially a rural location, preferably a district level hospital. Which implied that there needed to be emphasis on screening and down the road awareness. Practically only 4% of Indian women are screened regularly, and that's a statistic which probably applies to an urban context as well. There are no reliable screening programs in the country. The central government is preoccupied with other lifestyle diseases such as diabetes and hypertension, and investments in cancer screening are low. And it's further complicated by the fact that this is a woman's disease, which means in a social context, we're talking bottom of the pyramid, but also the bottom of a totem pole when it comes to healthcare accessing of healthcare services in a rural context. There are multiple ways by which you can screen for cervical cancer. The preferred solution is something called a pap smear, where a tissue sample is taken from the cervix and is looked at under a microscope. The assumptions there are that there's somebody competent to take a tissue sample from the cervix, and B, there's somebody competent to look at this under a microscope. And in India, we do not have enough pathologists to cope with this patient load or sample load. The alternate way of looking at this is by employing a diagnostic which tries to detect for the presence of the human papilloma virus, which causes this disease condition. And it's a simple calculation which tells you that it's way too expensive a solution to be rolled out for the entire country. So there needed to be a third solution. The preferred solution involves visual inspection with either acetic acid or with what's called Lugol's iodine. Basically, the idea is to stain the cervix with a paint which accentuates the presence of any lesions, and then you try to flag patients with these lesions for further follow-up. What's also worse is that essentially there is no record keeping of such cases of conditions that are observed by gynecologists when they inspect the cervix for various purposes. So in short, what's missing is that there's no community level screening system, there's no transferable electronic record keeping system, there are no trained professionals to solve this. You need an affordable and accurate test, and preferably an on-the-spot test. And beyond this, there's a need to shift into an awareness mode where you make people aware of the existence of this as a disease condition in the first place. What we have done is focus on the VIA approach, because we believe that's the only scalable approach in the country. That's a thought process which has since been corroborated by clinicians in the tertiary care sector. What we're looking at is visual inspection with a digital magnifier, which further permits storage of these images and diagnosis at a remote location by a gynec or a pathologist. There are several devices out there, but they're at ridiculously priced price points, which implies that most of these solutions will never see light of day in an interior location. So the colposcopes and cervical scopes, including gadgets which build on top of the optics in a smartphone. We felt that there was a need for a custom designed solution which would be in the hands of ASHA workers or midwives who would be able to deploy this. And so we went through a series of prototypes, including the smartphone type idea. And what we have finally settled down to is what we now call the gynecam, which allows for either a tripod or monopod mounted solution, or else a handheld solution, which allows for some digital magnification of the cervix, the ability to record data, the ability to push the data somewhere else, and is based on a battery mode of operation. So this is what an image would look like, the entire kit. This is what images taken by trained technicians look like. And this is what happens when you stain the cervix with iodine in this case, and you can see on the right the presence of a lesion towards the bottom, which implies, almost done. So we then pushed copies of this device all over the country and got feedback about the utility of this, especially in rural areas. And by and large, the feedback is good. What we have learned is that it's not enough to just build a gadget. We need to also train people to handle this gadget. So there's a full-fledged training program that we have also tried to create. That's being rolled out by Tata Memorial as a scheme wherein they train 25 ASHA workers to learn about the use of this. So we are also trying to carry out one final trial which validates that in the hands of an ASHA worker, we're going to arrive at a diagnostic conclusion which a gynec would otherwise have to deliver. So in other words, we're trying to replace the gynec, because the gynec is not going to be available, we believe, to a woman in a rural location. So can the midwife collect images, stream them somewhere else, and we try to work out validity of a diagnosis by that remote gynec relative to a live diagnosis. Thank you. Yeah, the second presentation is by Devjani Paul. You can see that session chairs are monopolizing this. Devjani is associated with the Tata Center on a project wherein she is trying to develop a mobile phone-based microscope, which has several applications in the point-of-care diagnostics domain.
Thank you. Thanks, Santosh. So I have got a very short presentation because there's a poster outside with more details where you can find if if you want them. So Santosh has already set the ground for the talk. It's a similar challenge that we are trying to address by microscopy, whereas you can see that samples are collected in the field, but then they need to be transported to a hospital for diagnosis, leading to either degradation of the sample, or when these people from these remote areas go to the hospital, they lose their day's wages. So to try to solve that problem, one option is, can we provide diagnosis at the site of sample collection, which leads to this whole concept of point of care diagnosis. So that is the healthcare challenge we are looking at. In the field of education, what we realized was that when you are teaching courses, whether it's in schools or in medical colleges and somewhere, there are lots of students and there are very few microscopes that are available. So everybody has to take turns at looking at the images at first. So in the digital microscope, you can actually project the images to the classroom, and then you can actually reach a larger number of people. I must mention this idea was given to us by Dr. Yogesh Kalkonde of Search, and as a result, the students took this microscope to a tribal yatra in Gadchiroli to educate people about, say, sickle cell disease, malaria, and so on. Okay. Now, to validate the microscope, we have taken on 2 disease cases that we are trying to work on parallelly. One is malaria. Malaria is a problem of poverty, and it affects about 300 to 500 million people annually worldwide, according to WHO statistics. And of course, if you can see this malaria map of India, it's quite intensive. So we are collaborating with this institute in Jabalpur, it's an ICMR lab, National Institute for Research in Tribal Health, to validate the microscope, the performance for their conventional microscope in diagnosing malaria. So winter is the time when they get a lot of malaria patients, and we're hoping to see how this microscope performs. Another area that we are looking at, it's called sickle cell disease. It's again a genetic disorder, and this map from Wellcome Trust shows that it affects a large number of people in India. There's a current paradigm of 2-step diagnosis that we are trying to solve by a 1-step microscopy. Here we are collaborating with a Gujarat government sickle cell screening project. We are very grateful to Dr. Jaundice Detection and his team in Valsad Raktdan Kendra, where we can actually go and test this, and we've been doing this for the last 3 years. So this is sort of the evolution of the microscope. It was an MTech project by my student Samrat, who's sitting in the audience. This is what it looked like when he graduated, and this is the various evolutions. And we also have the microscope available outside near the posters if you would want to actually take a look at the real thing. And this is the images of this filaria parasite taken using a commercial Olympus microscope and a mobile microscope, and you can see these images are comparable. And most importantly, last 3 days, almost every week, this microscope's been traveling to Valsad for the day. We're getting samples and we are coming back. Okay. Final slide is that along with this, in the Tata Center project, we are trying to come up with this microscopy-based test for sickle cell disease. There's not too much technical content right now in this slide, so I'm happy to answer those details later. So initially, there's a solubility test done in the field and then HPLC done at the hospital. And people fall through this crack between these 2 tests. So the idea was, can we have a single confirmed test that we can match with the performance of HPLC using microscopy? So here we combine a lot of technologies, microscopy, microfluidics, chemistry, and image processing together. And that leads to this imaging and shape analysis. Essentially, there are these 2 kinds of populations. This is the population with people who have this sickle hemoglobin and population who are normal, and this line kind of separates. So this is done with about 100 or known samples. When an unknown sample comes, you take 2 drops of blood, treat them with 2 different concentrations of an oxygen scavenger, and try to see after image processing where this point lies. So each point here represents 1 sample, and there you can actually see by positioning of these points, you can classify an unknown sample as normal, trait, and disease in this single test. Again, more details I'll be very happy to answer later. Thank you.
So third speaker is Jayesh Bellari, who's from the Department of Chemical Engineering. And Jayesh is going to talk on his project at the Tata Center, which is on the creation of a low-cost bone graft for bone reconstruction.
Thanks, Santosh and Devjani. It's my pleasure to talk to you for a few minutes on This bone graft that we've been working on for some years now, several students have contributed to it, and the two current ones, Kunal and Deepak, are in the audience here. There are two innovations that we have been working on. One of them is shown here. It looks simple enough. It's a piece of sponge, and the other one is a harder version of this sponge. And the idea is that it serves to support bone growth, and it is used as a bone graft to help the body heal itself quickly whenever there is a bone loss. And this product is at a stage where now we are ready for a clinical trial, a first in human trial, which of course is a tough call, tough challenge because of the regulatory process behind it. So as much as we innovate in this, we also need to innovate in this, which is a lab in which we can follow good manufacturing practices, which is the drug controller's standard to which a product has to be made, because this is a long-term implant in a body. Well, actually it's not so long-term because it's a biodegradable material and it goes away with time. So the special properties of this material are that it induces the body to help heal bone, and at the same time it goes away with time. The rate at which the body lays down new bone and the rate at which this product disintegrates and goes away is matched, so that for the particular application at hand. For example, there are some applications such as large bone replacements. Here is a full jaw, which of course you rarely replace, but you do replace larger pieces of bone, and that requires a different strength and degradation profile than one that is required in maxillofacial and dental applications, where there are small cavities in the jaw which underlies teeth, and you need to have that grow much faster. So the GMP lab that we've built allows us to make these products that will be certified by the drug controller to be suitable for implant into the human. And we've tied up with AIIMS, New Delhi, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, to do this, and they are very enthusiastic to be able to try this. So that's a quick summary. The need for this comes from the fact that there are many instances of bone replacement, and although there are grafts available, they do not have the kind of properties that ours does, which is of course beginning with low cost, because it uses materials that are commonly available. It is a drug standard gelatin which is used along with some other commonly available chemicals, and rather than have the high cost which some commercial bone grafts have, the cost factor is addressed. In addition, the properties associated with it, which include the strength, the degradation profile, and the fact that it is completely lost or completely goes away, bioresorbable at the end of the healing process once body's natural bone grows in it. All these are unique factors which help give this special properties. The way it's done today, of course, is to take a piece of bone. If you ever need to replace bone, the surgeon takes off a piece of bone from somewhere else, usually from iliac crest. So poor patient who's suffered an injury faces an additional insult of bone grafting, which such products can avoid. And the main challenges are to match the bone loss area, as well as give the internal structure to the bone, which natural bone has, which is a gradient of porosity, and to match exactly the shape of the defect, which we do by taking a CT image and then do a 3D printing of the graft, which then is fully resorbable. So some of the technical details are given here, which I won't dwell on. The applications include maxillofacial, cranial bone defects, and of course long bones, which I have not mentioned here. But the orthopedic applications are immense. And some of the performance testing, which is essential to get permission to go first in human, is shown in here. We are now looking at 3D printing of these. In fact, we are already doing this, and also building in the necessary gradients in porosity by which the graft mimics the structure of bone, not only from an external shape, but also from a microscopic shape right down up to the nanometer level, which is shown in some of these micrographs. So the idea here is to be able to give a surgeon suitable grafts which can be used in reconstructive surgery of bone, and do it at a reasonable price point. We are now about to get permissions to start this in human, which has been a battle on many fronts, including building the lab which I mentioned and getting the necessary permissions both internally within the IIT system, because it would be a first where the IIT system sponsors a study of this sort, which is first in human, which has its risks, of course. Yeah. So, but we are hopeful with the support of our Tata Center and IIT and AIIMS. We hope that we will have success in this. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Professor Narendra Shah, who is a professor in the Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, Sitara, in IIT Bombay. He is the PI associated with the Tata Center project, ready to use therapeutic foods for malnourished children.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Just a small disclaimer, as a faculty, as a teacher, we are used to taking a class of 45 to 50 minutes. Lightning presentation is first time for me, so please bear with if I try to sort of, yeah, can do it. Okay. All right. So the fact that the subject of malnutrition is introduced here or is part of this healthcare thing it's like a disease-like condition. So those who have a little aware about this domain, you have things like SAM and MAM. SAM is severely acute malnourished and MAM is moderately acute malnourished. And what brings in here is this is a real interdisciplinarity, and when you want to do a community management project, we had a sort of a great lesson. I mean, what we knew perhaps in textbook, that how you do community management projects, and here, for example, how you draw upon the different disciplines, medicine, for example, pediatricians, and like food process engineering expertise that we have here, and we try to sort of make a case, because if you see the data through NFHS and UNICEF, one among third child in globally, if you see, is malnourished, is present in India. And this is something what we say, that although we are in economic transition, that one of the burden that the public health infrastructure and facilities will have to look after is if we can't really look after the malnutrition, and in the malnutrition in the children who are less than 5 years. So what the science of pediatrics say, that whatever you are found, it is within the first 2 years. And so whatever sort of care you have to take for those malnourished children is you better take care of less than 5 years. And this is what the data indicates. We will not really get into the data, but what motivated for us in this TCTD, in the framework, to undertake this project was there are a lot of governmental institutions, NGOs, CSRs of corporates and policymakers are struggling to find out which is the best way. So there is one lobby which clearly says that what brings in sort of like what somebody from Tata Trust, Mr. Manoj Kumar, if he's still in the audience, he brought something like counseling, which is something which works the best. And what we sort of try to say, that here is the problem which is existing. Counseling can perhaps help into doing prevalence, but you have to cure whatever is sort of existing problem. As we see the big numbers in the NFHS survey, for example, the databases of Government of India, if you see that that the problem needs to be solved. So how can sort of a domain of food process engineering can create some formulations so urgency of cure is something which we wanted to sort of create some therapeutic foods or supplementary foods which have a therapeutic value, and therefore this work was to create an evidence through generating a community level management project. And so there were two categories of children that we sort of undertook. One was SAM, as we mentioned, and their requirement, as you see from, for example, from the open source literature, from WHO, UNICEF websites, that the requirement specifications are clear, how much calories, how much proteins are required. But however, if we had this information, somebody in a public health hospital like Sion Hospital, the pediatricians would not trust that a food which is made here. So what they said is that unless you make it in our campus under our eyes, so what we did, that okay, you have these specifications, how can you set up a unit to make something like this? So we actually went ahead and set up a unit like this to make sort of for their patients who are sort of
in hospital and sort of did what you call as clinical trials. And after doing, we got some interesting results from this. Then we did a community-based trial for those SAM children. And subsequently, after doing work for 2-3 years and getting some good results, we were sort of encouraged to do something for MAM. Because what happens if you see the cycle of malnutrition, those who are in MAM category, you know, like you can explain that in statistics terms, like, you know, the Z scores which are between -2 and -3 are called MAM, below -3 Z scores are called SAM. So the Secretary Child and Women in Maharashtra state says that, okay, there is enough amount of literature and evidence for SAM children. Can you do a project? Can you advise us as to what can be given to the MAM category children? And therefore, we did this project with the help of Tata Center on addressing. So this was the food for SAM, as we mentioned, and with the characteristics that, as you saw it, you know, with the fortification with these micronutrients, so macro and micronutrients. And this was compared with what is currently given in the Sion hospital for the inpatients. We call, in fact, of late, those who would have seen 3 months back, our Minister for Food Processing declared khichdi, this khichdi as a superfood. You know, those who have seen, for example, and so this is something which is regularly given. We call this as a standard nutrition therapeutic, which is given in Sion Hospital. How does this MNT compare? Because as given in the literature, the SAM children have a 9 times mortality risk, whereas MAM children have 3 times mortality risk. So this is really a disease condition, as we said that we put up a unit to make something like 400 kgs per month, and now currently they are making in the same unit something like 1000 kg per month in the Sion Hospital facility. And for the MAM, the moderate acute malnourished, we had the essential thing we learned in our SAM product was it was kind of monotonous. You know, eating the same pest with the same sugary taste, for example, was difficult, and this is what we learned from our community, acceptability of foods. So can we sort of, you know, integrate into the foods that are currently consumed like upma, payasam, kheer, ragi porridge and laddu, and can you sort of fortify them and meet those specifications, as we said that, you know, something like 300 kilocalories per 100 gram and so much of proteins and so much of micronutrients, and we fortified them and we did a project. So again, we have a poster outside of this, so we can discuss the results later. So what were the results, for example, for SAM and MAM? Half a minute, right? I'm told half a minute. So we have the sort of results also, and this for SAM, for example, we have published in the IAP Pediatric On-Call Journal, and for the MAM, for example, we have just concluded the project and we have communicated the results to Public Health Nutrition Cambridge Press Journal, and sort of I'm ready to take any questions in the subsequent question. Thank you. All right.
So our next speaker is Soumya Mukherjee, who's from the Department of Bioscience and Bioengineering, and he has a project looking at jaundice detection in neonates.
Okay, problem. Lots of kids, particularly preterm babies, are born with jaundice, and some of them don't need any additional care, but some of them do. Now, if any one of you had the opportunity or the misfortune of seeing a baby being treated for this, the most traumatic part is when the baby's heel is pricked twice or thrice a day to find out what is the bilirubin content, and accordingly UV therapy is applied. That happened to my little daughter. It was very traumatic for me as a parent. She was barely, 2 kgs. And so the thing is that, can we reduce the pinpricks? The good part about this project is that I have a industrial partner or a startup partner from the word go, Nishant, stand up. And so Nishant has a startup and he has developed some of the prototypes, and we are going on a clinical trial stage. So the numbers are actually staggering. If you look at the total numbers, they are staggering, and half the hospitals don't even have a bilirubinometer and things like that. Those are costly things. So number one, can we reduce the cost? Number 2, can we deduce the pinpricks? Number 3, can we do all of these accurately? There are 2 approaches that we have taken. One is diffuse reflectance spectroscopy with a multispectral LED illumination and RGB sensors. So that is the one that we are developing with Nishant, and it is almost at the clinical trial level. And the other one is differing absorbances of different photoisomers of bilirubin. So essentially the thing is that we reflect off light of various colors from the skin, pick up and see how much red is absorbed, how much green is absorbed, how much blue is absorbed, and then construct a reflectance spectrum, and that gives the yellowness of the skin. Of course, if this is the thing, then it should be quite available, affordable, RGB and simple camera. Nishant has the prototypes if you want to see. I mean, he'll be available around to show the various prototypes. It has gone through various stages. As you can see, there is a way to blanch the skin, press the skin, you know, like the doctor does, pull the skin like this and see what the yellowness is. So there is the principle of this, the reflectance spectroscopy. The other one is when bilirubin gets converted by UV therapy, the rate at which the conversion happens can also be calibrated. So that is the one that we are working with Jaslin, somewhere around here. He's a Tata fellow, so he's working on that. Sitting way back over there. So that's, that is a, so what we have to do is we have to have a very low cost diffraction grating in front of the mobile camera. All of these are based on essentially mobile cameras and web cameras and things like that. So we have to introduce a sort of pressure sensor to standardize the applied pressure on the neonate skin while taking the readings, because the doctors have their own hand calibration. We want to put that hand calibration onto the instrument. We are starting with preclinical testing and data collection from 40 neonates and in Tarachan Hospital in Pune. And once we do that, and once we have iterated through the algorithm to reconstruct the reflectance spectrum, we are going to take feedback and compare it with, of course, all the time comparing it with the gold standard, blood pinprick methods. Thank you. You did not have to want to.
Okay, it's a pleasure to welcome Lin Zhao, who's a grad student at the Department of Mechanical Engineering at MIT. He's involved with the Tata Center project, low cost, high temperature and pressure sterilization at One Sun.
Okay, good morning. So my name is Lin, and today I'm presenting in place of my advisor, Professor Evelyn Wan, on the project we have been working on for about 6 months on the topic of low cost, high temperature and pressure sterilization at One Sun. So the problem we are trying to solve is the lack of proper sanitation equipment, especially in the off-grid and rural area in India. The severeness of the problem are indicated in the map, and the statistics shows that 25% of the patients undergo surgery actually have infections due to unsanitary medical equipment. And more than 37 million of Indians are affected by waterborne diseases annually, and more than 1,000 children died below the age of 5 per day due to sanitation-related diseases. And the solution we are looking is to use the abundant solar energy, especially India has a high solar irradiance, to solve the problem. Before I jump into the technology we are working on, I want to map out the existing solutions to the problem. So the industry standard is to use the electric autoclave to sterilize the medical equipment. It is very effective, but it also requires enormous electricity because of the large latent heat of water. There are cheaper options like boiling water and chemicals, but they are less effective. And people have been looking at solar autoclave, especially for off-grid rural area. However, they usually come into a configuration like this, where there's large concentrating optics, and it has to track the sun continuously during the operation, so there's operator required. And also, because of the actual autoclave is placed at the focal point, it's very hard to insulate. So you always have large heat loss, which reduce the efficiency and effectiveness of the solution. So the device we are working on is aerogel autoclave, which is truly stationary and highly efficient solar autoclave. So the enabling technology is a material called optically transparent and thermally insulating aerogel. So aerogel has been known for its thermally super insulating properties. And usually for commercial aerogel, it is not optically transparent. And during the past few years in our lab, we have been trying to tailor its nanostructure such that the aerogel we make is optically transparent, which means it allows sunlight to pass through it, but confine the heat to the solar absorber. And actually, using our OTTI aerogel, we have demonstrated the record high achievable temperature under one sun, which is 265 degrees Celsius, which is more than sufficient for sterilization purpose, which is usually happen at 120 Celsius. So currently, we are working on incorporate this material into a very simple flat plate solar collector, such that instead of produce hot water, it can generate steam that is high temperature and high pressure for sterilization purpose. So the features of the system is that it doesn't rely on electricity at all, and it's passive operation. There is no need for tracking the sun, and no pump, no operator required. And it's high efficiency, which enables multiple sterilization cycles every day, and the cost is order of magnitude lower than commercially available autoclave. And we envision this kind of unit to be mounted on the roof of a rural clinics, and it should be sufficient to drive a sterilization vessel of, for example, 14 liter in volume. Thank you, that's all I have.
The final speaker in this session is Dr. Rich Fletcher, who leads the Mobile Technology Group at MIT D-Lab. And he's going to talk about his project at MIT on mobile technology for point-of-care screening and diagnostics.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rich Fletcher, and I direct the Mobile Technology Group at MIT D-Lab. My group does two main areas. One is diagnostic devices and diagnostic techniques using the mobile phone, and we also do mental health screening and diagnosis using the mobile phone. Like most of the people in this room, we're looking at the bottom of the pyramid users, and in the public health sector, either looking at sub-centers or ASHAs and Anganwadis, community health care workers. I'm going to talk to you about three projects today very quickly, and even though there are three projects, each project actually contains 3 or 4 different innovations, so they're actually clusters of projects within each topic. The first one is pulmonary disease diagnostics. As you know, the burden of pulmonary disease is quite high in Southeast Asia, India and China being the highest 2 countries. And this includes diseases such as COPD, which is one of the top causes of death. Also asthma, pneumonia is the leading cause of death for children under 5. And as many as 40% of the people in India have latent TB. So there's quite a few pulmonary diseases that are important in the area of India. The standard way of diagnosing pulmonary disease is to use something called a pulmonary function testing lab, which is pictured here. But this is quite expensive, and there's only about 50 or so labs in the entire country of India. So most people never have access to this. So our solution is to use a mobile kit. And rather than have one tool for each disease, we're trying to make one single kit that can be used for all pulmonary diseases. The first tool in our kit is a stethoscope, and this happens to be a 3D printed low-cost piezoscope. It's about an order of magnitude cheaper than commercial piezoelectric stethoscopes. And I also have a former student who's doing a company in Pune that's taking recycled plastics from bottles and making it into 3D printer filaments. So we'll be in the near future, we'll be able to take plastic waste and convert it to medical devices. This is guided through a mobile app, so we measure sound, we record sounds in multiple places at the torso and look at patterns. And then we apply machine learning to look for abnormal sounds. The second device in our kit is a peak flow meter, and rather than have any electronics, we use machine vision and augmented reality to capture the data automatically onto a mobile phone, as you see here. And lastly, we have a survey, a clinically validated survey that's also presented on a mobile phone. And we put all this data into a machine learning prediction algorithm, and this is a sample of our results. We've been doing this for over 5 years, and our recent study, which just finished, is 325 patients. And as you can see here, comparing our mobile kit to the gold standard, I don't know how to get a laser pointer on here, but if you look at the last two columns, you see that most of our specificity and sensitivity are in the 80% or so range, which is quite good. And we're currently putting all this into a mobile apps, which will be standalone, and this will be deployed, and we're currently field testing with the Swath Foundation here in Mumbai. Okay. And we're also starting a new NIH study, which will have 500 patients, and we're expanding that to include several other diseases, which you see listed here. Okay, the next project that I'll tell you about is cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of mortality throughout the world and also here in India. And one of the biggest problems with cardiovascular disease is that many people who have cardiovascular disease feel completely normal and are not even aware that they're at risk. So to fully diagnose and assess your heart condition, your cardiovascular condition, you actually need to look at 3 aspects of the heart: mechanical, electrical, and also the vascular part. And there are many startups that only do one of these, and yet they claim to have a solution for cardiovascular disease. So that is actually false marketing. You really need to do all 3. So we have a solution for all of these ways to analyze the heart and assess cardiovascular system. I don't have time to tell you about all of them, but I'll just tell you about one. And this is called pulse wave velocity. So this addresses the most common cause of death. 82% of CVD deaths are due to atherosclerosis, which is basically heart attacks and strokes. So your blood vessels get clogged. And many of you who are mechanical engineers know that the velocity of a wave inside a water pipe depends on the stiffness of the water pipe. So we actually have a low-cost way to assess the stiffness of your arteries. And we do that by placing very simple probes in 3 places on the body: the ear, the finger, and the toe, as shown here with a sample patient. And by looking at the relative timing of these pulses, we're able to measure the velocity of the wave in these blood vessels. And we did a clinical study just this past year with approximately 50 patients. And we showed, here it's shown in a graphical way, that we can very accurately and reliably distinguish between those who are healthy and those who are starting to get CVD risk and those who actually have already been diagnosed with atherosclerosis. So that's very promising, and we're currently working to publish that result. Last project I'll mention is related to community health workers and maternal and child health. And specifically, this is with child health related to some of the topics that were mentioned earlier: malnutrition, assessing babies in the first 6 weeks of life, which is most critical, and looking at things like not only malnutrition, but other abnormalities. So community healthcare workers have many challenges. They have a lack of education and skills. They're not trained health professionals. They have 8th standard education, and they have a lack of tools. So also, a lot of the data is recorded manually. So even though there are probably hundreds of mobile apps that are existing for community healthcare workers, but all of them are just data entry apps where all the data is collected manually and then just entered. So our mobile app, our approach is different. Our mobile app actually automatically collects the data and does the measurement. So, oops, some graphics are missing here, but, oh, okay. So our solution we call the ASHA kit, which looks at the basic things that are done by the ASHA, the height of the baby, the weight, middle arm circumference, which is a standard way of assessing malnutrition, and also looking at thermal analysis and heart rate, which is more for advanced physiology. The app looks like this. It's completely guided by the app that guides the ASHA through the process. The first one, the height measurement, the standard way is using this sort of heavy tool that is not portable, which is used to measure the height of the baby. Our solution uses machine vision and augmented reality, where we have this special pattern, and you point the camera at the baby, and it automatically measures the baby's height and corrects for geometric distortion and parallax. And the error that we have so far is 2 centimeters, and we're working to improve that even further. For the weight measurement, standard is using these sort of spring heights, spring scales, and our solution is we use the same scale that is already used by the ASHA, so we did not need to supply them with any new equipment, and we simply put a sticker on the scale that allows the phone to recognize it and automatically capture the reading. And our error is about 0.2 kg, which is reasonably good for the purpose of screening. And lastly, the MUAC measurement, which is the middle upper arm circumference. We created a special tape that is wrapped around the baby's arm. And this is the standard way that's used all around the world and endorsed by the WHO. But we put a special pattern on it that allows the phone to recognize it. And we achieved an error of 0.2 centimeters. And we just completed a 6-month field study with 13 ASHA workers, over 700 babies that went quite well. And as you can see from the demographics, most of the users were under the poverty line. And that's a picture of the group of ASHAs. And we're also adding bilirubin and a few other things. One more point which I'll make, which I think is important, is perhaps even more important than the technology, is we have demonstrated that if it's designed properly, this technology can be used by community healthcare workers and be used quite well. So we think that's very promising for many of the projects we've discussed here. So if you have any other questions, here's my contact information, and you can look at our website. Thank you.
So the first thing is that I'm going to pose a couple of questions to all the speakers, and each of them can take turns answering that, and then we'll throw the questions open to the audience. So the first question is this. We have heard of a lot of very different projects which are also at very different stages of development. And I would like each of the speakers to tell us very briefly what has been the topmost challenge while implementing this project. You know, it could be either in translation, it could be something else, funding, I have no idea, but I would like each person to sort of share with us their personal experience. Maybe we can go this way as we are sitting, and I can come last.
So with the cervical cancer project, we've had several issues with trying to figure out what a business model might be for screening to happen, especially if this is to be done in interior locations. There's 2 elements to this. One is the finance of the whole process and the availability of manpower to do this. It's a context where if you put a skilled professional in a rural area, they just will flee because there's a shortage of people in urban locations for such services. So you have to play this, we found that we need to incentivize a number of women to come forward, but also play with local stakeholders, whether they be hospitals or caregivers, to try to get engaged. So finance and the ability to actually deploy a solution in the field. Those are the 2 major challenges that we've been working on.
2 major challenges, the regulatory process and the regulatory process. Part of the problem is understanding that the regulator sometimes doesn't understand innovative products. And in the Indian context, that's a problem because medical devices and implants were never regulated until a few years back, and suddenly now they have come under regulation. There's a new bill an act which has been notified, which is supposed to get going now, but all the same, the ability to get a product approved for a clinical trial is really where we are stuck. Associated with that are two sub problems. One is getting a suitable knowledge base or a consultant who can help us negotiate that, and the second part of it is the reluctance of institutions to take risk. And that is, the risk is to actually embark on a trial of this sort, which is risky because you know the patient, despite informed consent, may suffer in extreme ways, and that is a risk one has to take across all medical trials, which are especially with those which are invasive. So I think these are some of the top line risks that and problems that we've had.
Well, regulatory, the big advantage that our project Microscope has is that we are already working with a startup who has some experience in taking things to the market or running things at a wider scale, running trials at a wider scale. So that is a big advantage that we have got. The major challenge has been actually to go completely unconventional in terms of the science or the tech behind the product, make it make it acceptable. And we are talking neonates here, and that is a very touchy or a very soft corner for people. Arranging for hospitals, adult patients would have got much easier, but access to neonates is a much more difficult issue. So that is one of the major challenges. Of course, the science and the tech behind that is challenge for everyone. That is not the issue. I do not even know how much regulatory approval will require in terms when the thing actually goes to market. It is definitely non-invasive, but it is not non-contact. So what sort of issues we are going to face, that is still, that is a question that I don't have an answer to, and I think that is going to be a challenge when we come to it.
The area in which we are working, malnutrition, is a complete actually government prerogative, and we also understand that if you really want to make a dent into in this area, impact on the sort of the last end or the beneficiaries, the malnourished children, you have to work with governmental institutions. And one of the challenges was and continues to become, and my colleague from MIT, I think, did touch upon a bit on this, like, simple things like, how do you measure the heights of, less than 6 years old, with accuracy. He mentioned his device is like plus minus 2 centimeters. And here, for example, you want to be accurate plus minus 1 centimeter or less. And the weighing balances, for example, you give them some in Anganwadis, within 6 months they just conk off. So some support from instrumental, from the companies who make instruments, and when we work with governmental institutions, on one hand you have a large chunk of money, but on the other hand there are procedures and protocols and all that, and how do we sort of, simple thing like when you want to give some food, and here you're talking about giving food to those who are malnourished, who have bad tummies, who have under disease condition, as I mentioned. So how do you ensure that there is that food security and all that? The government would say that you must train this to the SHGs and small, groups who can make this food. So getting to those standards, like then the other arm of the governmental institution, what we call FSSAI in this country, is Food Standards and Safety. So you have to meet those standards, and at the same time you want to have a cost less than 10 rupees per day per child. That is really a challenge we faced in this.
So from my perspective as a student working on this project, I feel like the most challenging part of the project is actually thinking about the different scale of a research problem and a real problem in the world. So for example, in the project where we are actually fabricating the aerogel ourselves, and basically we have to work in the lab for hours to fabricate a piece of the sample. but actually thinking about how to scale this up and how to find an industry partner that willing to maybe build a new fabrication line for us. It requires a very different mindset than solving a research problem, and like how to convince them this is a viable technology, for example. And also, like to solve a real problem, I think it's also very different than solving a problem in the lab, in the sense that you have to consider more factors. For example, we usually do our experiment indoor, and to build a device like that, we have to think about all kind of weather conditions and also human interaction factors, like user-friendly and safety. All those factors are typically not considered or not put a lot of emphasis in a research problem. So I think that different requirement of mindset is the most challenging aspect of the project I'm facing up to now.
Yes, in terms of, I have two things to say. In terms of the technology, probably the biggest challenge which is underappreciated and understated is the importance of design. So most projects fail in the field, not because the technology doesn't work, but because people can't use them. So the first time we did a project with the ASHA workers about 7 years ago, it completely failed. Not a single ASHA was able to use our mobile app. Even though our app worked perfectly well in the lab, they had never used a smartphone and they didn't know how to point the camera. It completely failed. So it took us 7 years to develop that, add the machine vision, the automatic tracking to make it easy to use. Just like an Apple computer. An Apple computer looks easy to use, but there's a lot of intelligence that's inside. That intelligence takes time to develop. The other thing I want to say is more on the investment and translation side. So I've successfully done a startup in India about 15 years ago that was acquired by Mobile Oxygen. They're a payment company in India. And what I wanted to say is that it is true that social entrepreneurs and doing a startup is probably the best way for you to create a market and to demonstrate that it could be viable. However, the reality is that most students at schools like IIT and MIT will probably not be social entrepreneurs, number one. And then number two, it's very difficult. So we know that bottom of the pyramid businesses have a very small margin, and it's very difficult for a small startup to have the scale to make it viable. So the good news is that I have met a lot of big companies who are interested in the bottom of the pyramid. You know, companies like Unilever, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble. But the challenge is, how do we make these companies aware of the innovations that we have? So I've been a big proponent of licensing and marketing. So I don't know how to, I can't do this by myself, but if any of you are interested, I think there's a big opportunity to do a better job of showcasing our technology at expos, things like the Customer Electronics Show that just passed in Las Vegas. But there are other trade shows here in India where I think we can get visibility and find those companies that have a hunger for going after this market. Thank you.
So I'll go last. So currently at the stage where I am, I need to make several pieces of the equipment to test at multiple sites with patient samples. And my biggest challenge has been access to manufacturing. Of course, there are manufacturers outside, but it becomes very expensive for us for them to make a few small pieces. So as Professor Ravi mentioned in the morning, if we actually have one place where we can do all electronic, machining, metal manufacturing, all those things provided to us at a reasonable rate so that we can sort of show the clinical validity of all of these samples, then it would be useful. For example, there's a very simple imaging chamber that we use, which you could call a microfluidic chip, but the foundries that are there in India, they're not really able to make those devices anyway. But this is something very common when I speak to my colleagues outside of India. So access to these kind of manufacturing facilities would really help us. So thank you again. Santosh maybe will lead the...
Maybe just take off from that point and ask the question of my other panelists as to whether they feel that other stakeholders ought to be brought into their projects at this stage of time, at this point of time, towards facilitating this translation. So Rich, for example, you pointed out the need to engage on business models, and you've talked about Devjani about the need for manufacturing support immediately next to us. So would any of you wish to take this on? Other stakeholders who might be critical towards these solutions rolling out. This could be either from a manufacturing perspective, policy perspective, regulatory aspects. Jayesh, you've already touched on regulation.
Well, this word stakeholders is a tricky word here. We do need even service for payment. Right? There are some services which might include manufacturing, but which might include going through the regulatory process. There simply aren't the correct sort of expert who can do this for us. So we do need to develop or be in touch with, or maybe we are not networking sufficiently correctly, of people who can help us pass through the regulatory system. That's one aspect. Second is to be able to get manufacturing done under GMP conditions at a scaled level of manufacture. And then, of course, those who have the necessary ability and vision to be able to translate this into a potential business. So I'd love to have somebody who sits with me and my group and helps us write out a business plan which we or somebody else might wish to look at, which would make this into a viable business, and who knows sufficiently the market space associated with us. So I think at several levels we do need partners, and I would love to engage with somebody who can help me on any or all of these.
You can agree that the word stakeholder is interested parties. Interested parties is a better word. Stakeholder, in a sense that when we are. By the way, I do not like the word bottom of the pyramid. It's a horrible word. Which I like the word top of the funnel. Everything is generated there. It trickles down to the bottom and gets accumulated in the bottom actually. Stakeholders, everyone is a stakeholder. We are trying to develop something for everyone. So everyone is a stakeholder. Now the question is that can we bring industry, people who are going to take it into the market, in a sense, the commercial firms, venture capital, all of that on board. We cannot do it at day one. Of course, we cannot do it at day one. Because day one, I try to show a concept, unless it is IT, where it is realizable maybe within 3 months or 6 months, venture capital will not venture in my way. There's a longer turnaround time in these things. So we have to bring in people at the opportune times, at the appropriate times. That is the most important. Yes, bring in interested parties at appropriate times.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think two challenges for in the domain that we are working for the young entrepreneurs. One is like, as we say, the instrumentation engineering. Like, can we think of, when you want to sort of measure a height, a child between 6 months to sort of 1 year is not able to stand. So can we have some kind of a blanket where the child will sleep and you can sort of, measure the height and will give the accuracy that we want. So that is some kind of a measurement challenge. And secondly, for example, if somebody can sort of interface between these government regulations or the budgetary sort of constraints that you have only 10 rupees or 15 rupees at the most per child per day, and you want to make these formulations in that framework and still satisfy the designer's sort of requirements in terms of proteins and micronutrients and without any sort of the microbial contamination. So these are the two challenges that for the entrepreneurs and how it is to be done. Well, I think we can sit and discuss. Yeah.
So my thought is that for technology like I'm working on, for like if you want to translate to for example a commercial company that's actually making the device, I think the economic is hard to justify unless you go to really large scale. So I think in that sense it will be like to start to actually implement this in large scale and put it actually into the real world is actually the challenging part.
Yes, the main thing I have to say is what I mentioned earlier, which we need to do a better job of advertising and marketing our technologies and making them available to the companies that are out there that are interested in the in this market. I don't want to use the word bottom of the pyramid, but for example, put yourself in the shoes of a company like Unilever. How does Unilever, if you work at Unilever, how do you find out about these projects? Are you going to go to every school's website and search through each patent or search through each paper, find out who's working and like companies are not going to do that. You need to meet them halfway. And the successful licensing deals that I've been part of and witnessed that when I was at the Media Lab at MIT all happened because we went to public venues that had thousands of people walking by and they heard about our project or they heard a story on the radio or they saw it on TV or in a newspaper. The companies do not read publications, academic journals, and they don't browse through websites looking for inventions. I mean, very few do. So we just need to do a better job of marketing. I mean, this is my opinion, but it's based on my previous observation.
I fully agree with that. I don't think we market our research, especially to the general public. We managed to eat into most of that time that we allocated for this, which means we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left for the audience to pose questions back to this panel. Could you, over there.
Thank you, sir. I'm Dr. Ravikant from Doctors for You. My question is related with malnutrition. According to new Government of India policy, they don't want to promote RUTF, anything packaged food or इसको business नहीं बनाना चाहते हैं. So what is the feedback from government on your this MNT thing? And the second is why since last 5 years I am heard only about the Sion Hospital manufacturing plant. Why you are not able to scale up to other state or even in Maharashtra?
Well, I think we did persuade one manufacturer, I think, based out in Nasik, to make these MNT equivalent products, which is, but however, as you mentioned, because of the government policies, you know, I think from a science perspective, you would very well understand that the small baby has a small tummy. So you need something which is energy intensive. You cannot give khichdi. If for example, that many calories, that many proteins have to go into the child's tummy to bring him out of the SAM condition or MAM condition, you would need that much of a quantity and in a small tummy. So therefore, for example, the merit of this MNT or whatever RUTF as it is called in global vocabulary, it does have a scientific merit and yes, you said, as you said, that there's some school of thought at sort of, you know, the I would say in the bureaucracy level. They feel that this is somewhere the companies are wanting to make a profit out of this, and therefore sort of, you know, it's not to be promoted or something. But if you take a very objective view and see the science of it, I think it does sort of the clinical study that we had done, the clinical trials that we have done, that it does sort of, you know, the children who are into the SAM condition and MAM condition do respond, and you can bring them out with these kind of issues. Yes.
Over there.
Hi, my name is Patrick Quigley. I work at Dahlberg Advisors, a social impact strategy consultancy. Thank you for the talk today. It's been really, really interesting. I think the point that you made, Richard, about the design failures of technology is a really interesting one. I wonder if teams at MIT or IIT record those learnings in a systematic way, and if so, are they publicly available?
Like all academic research, we do a very poor job of publishing failures, but I think a lot of people are talking about it, you know, not just in this space, but so hopefully that will improve. But I think the best way is just to to have private conversations with researchers, go to a quiet corner of the room where nobody can hear, and they'll tell you what failed.
Or just call them learnings and then everybody's happy. Thank you.
So some of these things are being taken up as case studies in the pro-seminar courses at both centers. And while that's a limited audience, it's at least finding some capture in terms of information and process through the case notes that are developed there. Yeah, there's a question here.
Hi, my name is Titus Sequeira. After 30 years, I'm back in India. So I'm just trying to learn the ways, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to listen to you guys. One of the important things, two questions for Dr. Professor on the malnutrition side. While we have a chance to undo something, there are things happening in the country which are not the right way. For example, the impact of genetically modified products on health and nutrition. So you have a chance at this point, when you're doing this extensive research, have you ever considered the role of GMO in food? Because you are feeding the children today, which will impact 5 years from now, 8 years from now. So you'll have to another device, another research to just take care of that. So if you have a chance to work with MIT, I know they do a lot of work. John Hopkins does a lot of work on this area. So it will be a good opportunity to look at that. How are you doing that, one? Second is, all the solutions were very much tech-centric, technology-centric. I'm 37 years in technology. I'm the most fearful guy about technology today after 37 years, because I don't know when my phone will be hacked and when my camera will be seen. So is there an element of cybersecurity that you take care of while you're devising these things? Because you're our brains. You are the ones who are telling us what to do next. So is there these 2 points that was eating my mind? I thought maybe I'll ask you this question. Thank you.
Genetically modified foods, I mean, after we have this being quite reasonably well accepted, the BT cotton, for example, people tried to introduce GM brinjal, and there was a huge protest, and then perhaps we could not introduce that. So I think there's a great deal of uncertainty in this. So to my mind, I think introducing something which is GMO in this child malnutrition as a food item might be a risky proposition in terms of acceptability at this point. We still not accepted the irradiated potatoes, for example. The BARC here has proven the point beyond whatever. We have not been able to, as we said, in this very room, we had a big discussion on this. Why should we eat genetically modified brinjal if we have the normal brinjal?
So, and with regards to data, it's probably the case that the Russians already have it. It probably doesn't matter. But yes, there is a huge risk. That's being considered actually as some kind of a digital locker kind of framework by which healthcare data in particular is going to sit. The bigger issue is how do you go about interconnecting hospitals and share this data? Data is not moving, which means services are not being provided as you move. So that's a larger challenge for the country, and therefore the first step is to get interconnected and then at some point start seriously worrying about security. We'll take one last question from over there.
Yeah, this is Dr. Das. This is not a question. Just wanted to tell you that in agreement with Dr. Richard, what he told is about so many good things are available, how we can make it aware, how others will know that we have so many nice things. I was very much thinking in this direction, and before the panel discussion, I was explaining this to Dr. Santosh Narone about the same thing, that it is so important for us even to know, like all the projects that you people said was so important, so brilliant, and it is how we can create a device so that even in India, everybody is aware that these things are available. And I have only one suggestion, that nowadays we find lots of people are coming from US, Israel and Europe, and there are even individuals are coming and telling about a bunch of technologies, and I do not think it is at marketing, but even making us aware what is available. And there are few things have already become successful, which we have seen during this whole journey. In the similar line, can we identify not agencies, but we will definitely find very important people who can really present this kind of scientific things properly, which is very important. How we present it and where we present it. And that kind of people are also available in India at the moment. If we just make a connection, then it will be much more easier to showcase this and to make it, to address the challenges that we spoke about. Just a suggestion from our end.
Yeah, actually, IIT Bombay as such has taken up a role of publicizing the science and the tech research that is going on. If you notice Times of India or any of these, but the newspapers, you see, you have to build up the public perception. Otherwise, the public thinks what is IIT doing? You know, they're a bunch of undergrads and all that, and they go abroad, and that is the typical public perception, which is grossly wrong. 90% of the undergrads nowadays stay back in India. But the public perception is like that, then that has to change, and that will not change till every day that page of Times of India is covered with Indian science news. The only newspaper that does it is Hindu. They have a one page of Indian science news. Times of India does not have that, neither does Indian Express and all that. And that requires an amount of so-called publicity, advertising and all that. And academics are notoriously bad at that, and Indian academics. So IIT Bombay has actually contacted an agency who's supposed to do that, who's supposed to talk with the faculty here, bring out the essence of the science and how it is acceptable to, how it's useful to society, and try to publicize that as much as possible. So that is the way that, you know, it is, the present construct is. We have to do more, definitely, in that regard.
I think Rich had a follow-up point, and then we'll take one final question.
Actually, sorry, Owen Barclay Hill. I am a Bhumiputra who lives in England and comes occasionally and winds up the MBA students at SOAM. I've been doing it for the last 7 years. I'm not an academic as such. The point I'm trying to make, the observation is you guys are the formal economy in India, talking to the formal economy in India, trying to get elements of the formal economy in India to try and engage with what you guys are doing, which is brilliant. I've just come back, Ashokji, I hope you don't mind me saying this, I've just come back from Vigyan Ashram. And this is an institute some of you may be aware of, which is trying to educate the failures, 80% of the failures of the Indian education system. I also observe, coming back after many, many years, that there is an informal economy which is intelligent, but is disregarded. The mochi who used to sit outside main gate, the guy who replaced the SIM card holder in my mobile phone, which will cost me £50 in England and 3 weeks wait. He did it in 2 hours for 750 rupees. Why aren't you guys engaging them rather than the Unilevers of this world? Now, it's a hell of a challenge. But if they're doing 3D printing in this deprived area of Parbal outside Pune, come on, guys, get your act together. If I have, it's like biting the hand, but if I have a criticism of IIT from 7 years of engagement, is you're not very good. You are in the commercial area of India, the commercial capital, Bombay, Mumbai, what do you want to call it? And it's very poor in engaging your alumni and people to get engaged in this, rather than saying, how do I get to HUL, how do I get to Johnson & Johnson, how do I get to Asian Paints? There are people out there who are very poor, lazy at keeping those connections and engaging them. That's not a question, that's an observation. I hope you don't mind it. Sometimes an oyster has to be created with a little irritation. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll digest that over lunch. So thanks to all of you.